you so much, Debbie. You know, there are some things that may bother me that may not bother you. Some things maybe that really get on your nerves that really don't affect me at all. But there are some things that I believe are universally aggravating, that just across the board is part of the human experience that drive us crazy. Let me give you an example of what I believe is one of those. Let's say you're out driving. Let's say you get out on 85. Let's say you're headed towards Charlotte. So at 70 miles an hour, traffic is moving along pretty well. It's a nice, pretty day. Everything is going just fine until your foot begins to itch. You ever experienced that as you're driving? And it's not the top of your foot, it's the bottom of your foot. And I'm not saying it's because if you got athlete's foot, that's a whole different thing. But we're not talking about you. Just regular people without athlete's foot, so non-athletes here. Anyway, so the bottom of your foot is itching. And it seems like invariably, it always seems to be your right foot. So it's the gas pedal. And so you're going along and your foot is itching, and but you've got a tie-on shoe, you've got a tennis shoe, something like that. You don't have easy access to it. And so what you try to do is, if you're me, you take your foot off, and what do? You start stomping, but you got to hurry up and get back on the gas. And then you keep, well, that didn't work. I mean, you look like you've got a rhythm problem. And so you keep at this, and finally it gets to the point where you're sweating. You can't, it is driving you insane. Some of you right now, your foot is beginning to itch. I can see it. You can go ahead and reach. It's okay. You're not driving. Anyway, so you have tried everything that you can, but nothing is working. And so finally, you set the cruise control. Wait till the traffic is cleared a little bit. Then you slide that shoe off. And then you dig on that foot as if you're going to China. Regretting every fingernail that you have bit off before, because, man, it feels so good to get to that itch. It has been driving you crazy, and finally, once you have gotten to it, you feel so relieved. You feel so relieved. Hold that thought for a moment. We've been working our way in this month through a number of songs that God used David to write in the book of Psalms. And these songs were ultimately expressions of what his experience was with the Lord, but they became a testament not simply to what God did in David's life, but what he can do in the lives of other people. And what we're going to see today in the song that we're going to look at today is that it helps us think about the whole experience of relief from this perspective. How is it that I am relieved when God forgives me? How is it that you are relieved when God forgives you? Now, you remember perhaps the old Alka-Seltzer commercials, Plop, Plop, Fizz, Fizz, oh, what a relief it is. I'm telling you, this type of relief does not require Alka-Seltzer. But what does it require? Look with me in your Bibles to Psalm 32 today. Psalm 32, and we'll begin reading with verse 1. David says this in Psalm 32, verse 1, "How joyful is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. How joyful is a person whom the Lord does not charge with iniquity, and in whose spirit is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones became brittle from my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was drained, as in the summer's heat. Then I acknowledged my sin to you. I did not conceal my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave me the guilt of my sin. Therefore, let everyone who is faithful pray to you immediately. When great floodwaters come, they will not reach him. You are my hiding place. You protect me from trouble. You surround me with joyful shouts of deliverance." This passage, or this psalm, if you see the superscript above it, it says Psalm 32 of David, it says a maskil. It's believed, and there's pretty widespread agreement that that term is some sort of musical expression, giving some hint as to the manner in which this was to be sung. Now, exactly fully what it means, we don't know, but it seems pretty confident that this was something that became not simply the reflection of what David's experience was, but became truth and realities that the people of God in David's day, and since then, they began to sing these things because it does use song, use words to help us answer this question: how am I relieved when God forgives me? Well, based on what this song says, the first answer we see is this: I am relieved because I can quit pretending. I am relieved because I can quit pretending. Now, last week we started talking about this, and I believe this is important in terms of context so that we get fully what it is that David's talking about. And hopefully you are familiar with the story of David. Remember, he's Israel's second king, and long story short, he has an adulterous affair with a woman named Bathsheba. Because of that affair, she becomes pregnant, and to cover up the pregnancy, he winds up effectively ordering or issuing an order that would result in the death of her husband. So he is not only guilty of adultery, he's guilty of murder. And after having done this, it seems that David is probably operating under this pretense: no one knows. No one will have any idea these terrible skeletons that are in my closet. No one will have any idea what's behind me in the rearview mirror. And I suppose, in truth, David operated like so many of us do, and that is that he compartmentalized what he did. And when we compartmentalize, what we tend to do is to take a particular thought, a particular reality in our minds, we put that in a box, we put the lid on it, and we put it up on the shelf and do our best not to take that box off of the shelf. And it seems likely that that's exactly what David did. And for a period of time, he's operating as though nothing is different at all. None of these things are part of his backstory. None of these things are part of his experience. And no one will ever really know fully what all it is that he has done. That is, until a guy named Nathan shows up. He's the prophet of God, and in short, he wags his finger at Nathan. He says, and having described all of these events, he says, "You're the one that did this." And at that point, you have this house of cards that David has built begins to crumble. And all of a sudden, he is keenly aware of this fact: what I have done is known. Certainly it is the case that God knows about this. In fact, all along God has known about this. Now, this guy Nathan knows. Who else knows? What might happen because of this? Are there consequences that may come to fruition because all of this which was done in darkness is now getting the light to shine on it? And for these and so many more reasons, David, all of a sudden, this which had been so compartmentalized, that had been so much in the box with the lid shut tightly on it, now is out in front of him, and it is eating him alive. And he is racked with guilt. And he describes in verse 3, he says, "When I kept silent, my bones became brittle." It's as if this is beginning, the weight of guilt is beginning to have a physical effect on David. And some of you can say from your own experience, I know what that is like, that there is this mental and emotional and spiritual turmoil that's going on inside that begins to have physical ramifications. It affects my sense of well-being. It affects how I feel. And David gets to the point, he's like, 100 years old. It feels that this is so weighing on me. And he describes that he has this groaning all day long. Inside, this is gnawing at him, and there is no relief that comes from it. He tries to busy himself with the affairs of state. He tries to busy himself with hobbies and with conversation, but in the back of his mind, it is never really in the back of his mind what he has done and the colossal guilt that he feels from it. And he says, day and night, he's talking to the Lord, day and night your hand was heavy on me. And he's describing how he is experiencing this unrelenting conviction. The thought is, maybe if I can just go to bed, if I can go to sleep, then this will get off my mind. But he can't sleep. He wakes up. He is experiencing day and night this agonizing guilt. And he says, my strength was drained as in the summer's heat. You probably have experienced this before. On a hot July day, let's say the high is 95 degrees, you've been working out in the yard all day. By the time you get to the end of the day, you feel like, David is saying, I feel like I am just drained. I am exhausted. I'm exhausted emotionally. I'm exhausted mentally. I'm exhausted spiritually because the weight of what I have done is weighing so terribly heavy on me. And all of this was experienced when? According to verse 3, it says, when I kept silent. When I kept silent. When he describes that, what is he talking about? Ultimately, I believe he's describing his silence before God, where he has done these things, and he thinks that no one is the wiser, and I'm not going to speak of them even to myself. I'm not going to talk about them to God. I'm not going to talk about them to anyone, and this is just going to be my secret that I'm going to take with me to my grave, and I'm not going to say one word. It's going to be crickets about this. And as he is experiencing that silence inside, the weight of this guilt is getting greater and greater and greater and greater. This comes as a contrast to what you see in the opening verses, where he describes joy that is experienced by the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered, who the Lord does not charge with iniquity. Now, the words that he just used to describe behavior are words that mean missing the mark, actively and intentionally rebelling, and acting in a crooked, evil manner. And so David has just said, when I have experienced something like this, or when someone has gone through where they have made choices that are characterized as rebellion and evil and wicked and crooked and all of those things, when they experience forgiveness for that, man, that's huge. But when you keep your mouth shut, when you just remain silent about this, it eats you alive inside. And David says, that was my experience. What I want you to notice, though, is that it seems the greater the degree is that David comes to grips with the accurate nature of his choices, the greater the guilt is. What I'm saying is this. For so long, it seemed as though he just I'm just going to put this out of my mind. I'm not going to think about it. But now he's thinking about it. And he's beginning to see in very clear, stark terms, this is exactly what I did. David, what's the matter with you? You did that. These attributes, these characteristics, these adjectives describe not somebody else. They describe you. And the more it is that he realizes this, and the more it is that he comes to grip with the scope and the scale of what it is that he's done, the greater the degree of guilt it is that he experiences. And so what I want you to understand is this. The more it is that you understand that your sin or my sin, the more it is that we understand the reality of it, the greater the feelings of guilt are. And the more it is that you're paying attention to the fact that my sin is consequential, the more it is that you think about the fact that your sin is consequential, the greater the degree of the feelings of guilt are that you're going to experience. And it seems like David, up until this point, had been minimalizing it, trivializing it, compartmentalizing it, but now it's been brought to the fore. And he says, when I kept silent, I felt so bad. But then he describes, this is after the fact, in those opening verses, about the relief, the release that he feels having been forgiven, where his iniquity is not any longer being charged against him by the Lord. But notice at the end of verse 2, he says, in whose spirit there is no deceit. In whose spirit there is no deceit. When you are practicing deceit, what are you doing? When you are deceiving, what are you doing? You are attempting to pull a ruse. You are trying to trick. You are trying to fool. You're trying to hoodwink someone. David described before he experienced God's forgiveness, he was practicing deceit. That he was attempting to fool. To fool who? Anybody that would pay attention. If somebody was looking at David, what did he want them to think? That everything was okay. He wanted before anyone to think, well, that's David. That's the great king of Israel. Not David, the sinner. Not David, the adulterer. Not David, the murderer. I want to be this man after God's own heart, not this one who's harbored lust in his heart. And so he held on to this. And as he's holding on to this inside, what he's doing is attempting to deceive everyone, maybe even himself, as he looked in the mirror every day to say, you're okay. You're okay. But finally, he has been so racked by guilt, it has led him to come in honest, plain confession to the Lord. He experiences forgiveness, and finally he's able to say, it feels so good, I could quit pretending. For so long, I have been acting as if everything was okay. Everything was okay ultimately between me and God, and now things actually are okay. And I am so relieved because now I can quit pretending. I remember a few years ago, it was Caroline's 40th birthday, and I decided that I wanted to do a surprise birthday party for her. And we were going to do it down at the picnic shelter just below the church on a Saturday. And it wasn't going to be some huge event, but I wanted this to be special for her. And so I had spent a fair amount of time trying to plan this thing out and to make it a special weekend. And she's got a longtime friend, close friend of hers from Charlotte that I had reached out to her. And as I'm reaching out to her, first of all, I had to figure out how I could contact her. And so I'm having to look into Caroline's phone to get this girl's phone number and say, hey, anyway. So I've got to reach out to her and explain what I'm trying to do and to invite her to come stay with us over that weekend. But I need to say, all right, so I need you, you will show up unannounced. And so I'll send you guys out to eat on Friday night. She's just going to think that you're going to stay the weekend. And in the meantime, what I'm going to need you to do is on Saturday morning to get her up and take her somewhere. I don't just figure out where you'd like to go in Greensboro. I can help you with that, but figure out where you're going to do it with that. And so then I need you to have her here at the church at this particular time. In the meantime, I need to work on getting a cake. I need to get some balloons. I need to get some decorations. I need to coordinate with Caroline's parents, with my parents, with my sister, I think her brother, anyway, with a number of people to make sure that people know about this and that everybody keeps quiet about this. And I was going to need to, we had just gotten some of those Ring cameras at our house. And at that point, they'd send you a notification anytime there's motion outside. And I'm like, holy cow, she's going to get notification that when there's motion outside, and she was going to see her parents showing up on her phone. So I've got to turn these cameras off. I've got to get her phone. I mean, all of these things are going on in my mind. And I'm not lying. Those days leading up to that weekend, I was so stressed. I was so wound tight. I was so on edge because I've got this big ruse that I want to act like everything is okay. Inside, I've got 8,000 lists of 10,000 things on them that I want to make sure all these little bases that get covered. And so finally, we get to that Saturday. Finally, she shows up here. There's her birthday party. We have some food. We have some cake. We go home, and I'm telling you, I feel so relieved because for days I've been acting as if everything's okay, and now everything is okay. Maybe you came in here this morning, and when I talk about experiencing guilt and the nagging weight of that, perhaps you went to bed with that. Maybe you woke up in the middle of the night thinking about some of the choices that you've made. And I'm not suggesting that they rise to what you might categorize as adultery or murder, but there is something, maybe even at this very moment, that is gnawing at you. David knows what that is like, but he also knows that when you come to just own it before the Lord, when you just come clean, the relief is wonderful. And you can go from acting as if everything is okay, and acting and pretending as though everything is okay between you and God, and things actually being okay between you and God. I am relieved because I can quit pretending, but I'm also relieved because I've made it easier for next time. I've made it easier for next time. It is unfortunate, but it is also unfortunately true that every single one of us is a perpetual screw-up. Now, understand me in this. I am not suggesting that makes it okay that we keep acting out of bounds and that God has put up boundaries that we just ignore. We just say, well, we're going to screw up anyway, so we should just come to accept it. Because what should be the case is this. As a follower of Christ, the longer it is that you walk with the Lord and the more serious it is that you take your relationship with Him and your commitment to Him, the frequency of your sin should absolutely decrease. And it ought to be the case that there aren't sins that keep trapping you and ensnaring you. There should be growth and maturity that you experience. Nevertheless, this side of heaven, you and I are still going to act out of bounds. Nevertheless, there are still going to be instances where you say something that you should not have said, that you are going to entertain a thought, a feeling that you should not have had, an action, a behavior that you are going to experience that God has said, listen, that should not be a part of your experience. That is across the line. Unfortunately, there's still going to be those instances. And with that in mind, pay attention to what David has been describing. He has just described his sin against God, the forgiveness that he experienced in the face of overwhelming guilt. But then notice what he says in verse 6. He says, therefore, let everyone who is faithful pray to you immediately. Now, there's a couple of things we're going to notice about this. But the first thing I want you to pay attention to is this. David is saying that having now experienced God's forgiveness, my choice is going forward that if I violate His standards, what I have just done, I'm going to do that again. And by that I mean having now crossed the boundaries that God has put up. I've sinned and I've experienced the guilt, the colossal weight, and being eaten alive inside because of this. And then I own this before the Lord. I confess this to Him. I experienced His forgiveness. So going forward, that's what I'm going to be doing. And so if I disobey Him again, if I am experiencing feelings of guilt, I'm not going to sit on this. I'm going to go to Him. I'm going to go to Him quickly in confession. You know, over the years, I have made literally thousands of hospital visits. And in those many visits, I have been to the hospital for a lot of, in particular, hip replacements and knee replacements. And so maybe some of you here this morning, I have prayed over your leg and watched as they mark yes and no on your knees and that type of thing. Anyway, so one of the things that I have noticed is that many times, if you have one bad knee, do you know what you also have? Another bad knee. Now, one may be a little bit worse than the other, but I don't know if you've thought about this. Your knees are the same age if they have not been replaced. And so if this knee is 75, well then that knee is 75. And if this one is wearing out, odds are this one's getting kind of long in the tooth as well. And so invariably what has happened, I can't tell you how many times this has happened, though, where I've heard this story over and over and over and over again. So what has happened is that someone, they're like this, and they've been walking like Chester from Gunsmoke for a while. And they're getting ready to get a parrot on their shoulder. Their leg is so stiff, it's like a peg. But finally, it gets to the point, it's bone on bone, and they say, I can't deal with this any longer. But in the meantime, what they have been doing, they've been going to the doctor, going to see the orthopedist, and they've been getting cortisone shots, they've been taking pain pills, they've been taking ibuprofen, they've been using cold packs, heating pads, they've been doing everything they possibly can. But finally, it gets to the point where I can't put it off any longer, and they finally have surgery. And this one is bad, this one's terrible, this one is bad as well. And so finally, they get this one done, and afterwards, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. You know what I discovered? I mean, it wasn't like wonderful or anything, but man, my leg feels so good. My only regret now is that I didn't have this done sooner, and I'm going to go ahead and get this one done too. What I'm saying is this. The thought was that experience is going to be so bad, I'm going to put it off, I'm going to delay it, and then actually having experienced it, gone through it, you're like, well, that was dumb. I should have gone ahead and got that fixed because the relief is so wonderful. It is that same thought, I believe, that God is using David to communicate here. He has been eaten alive with guilt. He kept putting this off and leaving the box with a lid on it up on the shelf. I'm going to put that out of my mind. I'm going to not think about that. I'm not going to address it. I'm going to just act as though that has never happened. But it kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse and festering and keeping him up at night and affecting him physically. It's just been terrible. But finally, he goes to God in confession. He experiences forgiveness and says, man, that wasn't so bad. In fact, it is so wonderful. If I ever do this again, if I act out of bounds in the future, I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to delay. I'm going to go to Him in confession and to experience forgiveness. Put another way, I am so relieved, and I am relieved because what I've done now is I've made it easier for next time. I've made it easier for next time. Finally, what David communicates is this: I am relieved because I've had an experience worth recommending. I've had an experience worth recommending. I said that verse 6 contains a couple of thoughts. One is, he says, let everyone who is faithful pray to you immediately. And that's not what he did before. Before it was like delay, obfuscate, hide, pretend, act, operate with a ruse, deceive, act, pretend, put on a mask, do all that stuff. But now I'm not going to do that anymore. In fact, my lesson is this: when I sin going forward, I'm going to immediately come before the Lord and say, Lord, this is what I've done. I mean, what might have been done in secret from anyone else has not been secret before you, and so I'm going to go ahead and own this before it eats me alive any further and experience the forgiveness and relief that comes from that. But he says this. It's not simply he's describing his own experience about going to the Lord again immediately, but he says this. It's a declarative statement. He says, therefore, let everyone who is faithful pray to you immediately. He's like, here is my experience, and it was so good. It was so wonderful. It was so relieving. I want you to experience that, and you to experience that, and you to experience it. I want everybody to experience this. The relief that he experiences is so great and is so significant, and he is so relieved because he has had now an experience that is worth recommending. One of the questions we haven't dealt with, though, is what you see in verse 3, where he describes when I kept silent. Why the delay? When David did this, as horrible, as egregious, as out of bounds as it was, why did he just act like everything was fine? Why didn't he just go to the Lord and say, this is it. This is what I have done. I can't believe that I've done that, but these choices became descriptive of not somebody else, but they became descriptive of David, and I'm going to own that before you and call it like you call it. Why didn't he do that before? In truth, the Bible doesn't really overtly give us the answer to that question, but I believe there's enough contextually here that we can reasonably surmise the answer to that question, and it's this. I believe David, having come to grips with the gravity of his choices, once he realized that his actions really, really did matter, once they finally mattered to him, he knew this is going to matter to God. And if I go to Him and say, this is what I've done, it's going to be ugly. He is going to harangue me. He is going to castigate me. He is going to impugn me. He is going to berate me. He is going to do all of these things. And then actually having gone to God in confession, what he experienced is what we see described in the New Testament. If we confess our sins, He's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And David's thought is, man, that wasn't so bad. Now, that doesn't excuse his behavior at all. That doesn't rationalize his choices. That doesn't minimize his sin whatsoever. But what it does is exemplify and extol how wonderful it is what God does for screw-ups like David and screw-ups like me and screw-ups like you, that He forgives, and we are able to experience relief that's worth recommending to others. to say to you, to everyone, man, this is what God did for me, and I promise you, He'll do it for you. And as for me, I'm going to Him immediately in the future, and my encouragement for you is to do exactly the same thing. David experienced colossal relief. You know, our youngest child, John, is 2. He'll be 3 in February. And, you know, we call that stage, or that 2-year-old, we call it the terrible twos, because it really is. It's like having a monkey loose in the house. It really is. And they are, right now, I just put our Christmas tree up on Friday, and he doesn't understand. He believes that there is now something standing in the corner that is covered with toys that he should pull off and play with. So we're struggling with that. And for as taxing and as demanding as this 2 to 3-year-old stage is, it's a really, really cute stage. And there's a lot of innocence, there's a lot of curiosity. It's a lot of fun to watch, to be sure. One of the things that's interesting, though, too, is the stuff that you can tell is going on in the mind of a 2 or 3-year-old. And we've experienced this with John. I've experienced it with our others as well. And at this stage, one of the things that they like to do is to hide and seek. And at 2 to 3, I don't know if you're aware of this, in your mind you operate with this notion: I can hide in plain sight. So if I cannot see you, you cannot see me. So therefore, I can have a blanket over my face, and I'm therefore hidden because I cannot see you. You therefore cannot see me. And then I can go, peekaboo. And it's so much fun. 2 to 3-year-olds operate as though if I can't see you, if I am hiding from you, you cannot see me. Of course, that's not true. It's not true. And I can see him. I can see each of our kids. What I want you to realize is this: as silly as it is for a little 2 to 3-year-old to think that just because I can't see you, that I'm attempting to hide myself from you, you can't see me, it is no less foolish for me as a follower of God to operate that way with Him. In Genesis 16, verse 13, there is a title that is given to the Lord where He is described this way: as the God who sees. The God who sees. Whether or not this is alarming to you, whether it is frightening, whether it is disheartening, it doesn't change the fact that there is nothing as a creation of God that I have done, that you have done, that you have said, that you have thought, that you have entertained. There is nothing that has ultimately been done in secret. Nothing. And maybe that reality at this very moment causes you to begin to sweat, to feel a bit apprehensive, to feel some anxiety. There's a whole stack of words that we can use for that, but ultimately the best word is this: it's conviction. It's conviction. And what you can do is just to act like everything is okay. Put it in a box, put a lid on it, put it on the shelf. But I'm telling you, over time, it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And one of the things that became a song that the people of God in David's day began to sing was Plop, Plop, Fizz, Fizz. Oh, what a relief it is to experience God's forgiveness. Will you bow your heads with me?